I think we will just move it right along to our next guest, who I see is in the Zoom here, James Turgal. So James Turgal is the former Executive Assistant Director for the FBI Information and Technology Branch. He has personally helped many companies respond to and recover from ransomware attacks and is an expert in cybercrime, cyber insurance, cybersecurity, ransomware, and more. James draws on his 2 decades of experience investigating and solving cybercrimes for the FBI. He was instrumental in the creation of the FBI's terrorist watch and no-fly lists. James, it's great to have you here today.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So I'm excited to hear I believe you have a presentation that you've prepared for us.
Well, it was more a conversation that I wanted to have with the group about the whole concept of securing cyber and satellites, right? So the whole concept of being multiplanetary and the need to do that, I think is a absolutely something we need to do, and it's an imperative. But having worked cyber, most of my career, I started working cybercrime and created a cyber task force in 2002 when the FBI really started to understand that cyber was going to be a part of everything, right? Bank robbers use cyber. You name it, right? There's not a criminal group out there that doesn't utilize some aspect of cyber. And so one of the things that I think we forget about is we don't tend to look up. Look what's happened with China and the balloons, right? We don't tend to look up. And so we think of cyberspace as this nebulous, piece of the computer out there in the cyber world, but the cyber satellite, the cyber real space out there is where we should be thinking this should be going, right? The recognition that the risks of space are not just physical, but they are absolutely tied to cyber, right? The protecting them has not been prioritized at all. And if you look at what Russia just did, right before the launch of the action into Ukraine, right? What did they do? They hacked the Viasat satellite system, right? Which is a command and control piece, not just inside Ukraine, but also, right? U.S. military used that as a communications conduit with our allies in Europe. And so I think that was certainly a wake-up call that, oh wow, right? So we always believed that could happen, but I think we need to think deeper as to what that looks like, right? And the growing risk of major cyber attacks in space on satellite systems. Let's call this what this is, right? So satellite systems, space technologies, think about it, they support climate research, right? 99, I'm a pilot as well, so I'm absolutely keyed into weather. 99% of our accurate weather reporting, right, comes from space, comes from satellite systems. The ability to make informed decisions not only about climate issues, but decision-making and awareness on changes of both geology, geography, all of those things, right, are now based a lot on satellite data, communications, applications, high resolution real-time video, monitoring of our planet. There's probably 100, I don't know the number, but there are probably hundreds of satellites up there in, geosynchronous orbit, and being able to understand not only where our planet is going, right, because of the growing risk of environmental issues, but now you take not just the protection of the planet piece, but now talking about protecting cyberspace and cyber and space together, and that intersection as critical infrastructure. And we've not done that in the past. And I think the best way to handle this and to start the conversation is to really look at, how do we bolster space and cybersecurity at the same time? Space information sharing, communications, right? We are never going to become a multiplanetary species unless we get the both combination and intersection of space and cyber right. You're never going to be able, the only way that we can send probes out, the only way that we can have conversations with spaceships and other vehicles out there as they leave Earth is by satellites, right? And if we fail in that endeavor to actually secure those, and we fail to understand and think about this as critical infrastructure, right? Just like our power systems, our our energy systems, right? Water, I mean, you name it, right? It is absolutely critical infrastructure. So recognizing the critical importance of our space systems as an actual, part of critical infrastructure, creating that kind of national, what I would consider national and international information sharing architecture to secure and make those systems resilient, right? It was a DDoS attack that that the Russians used on the Viasat system, and the ability to take that down, right? Pretty low level cyber attack methodology. Not too crazy, but being able to engineer that with the best possible practices, actually creating, and there's a number of classified domains. So I worked with cyber again all my career, but there were some satellite aspects to that. There's a whole classified conversation to be had here, but also moving this into more of like interagency, right? The federal risk management, having ability to spread this risk. Talk a lot with boards now. It's what I do at Optiv, is their board relations program, and it's all about spreading risk across the vectors. And so I think we need to think about and talk about those issues, and how cyber and space are really critical infrastructure, and how we need to do it better. What questions do we have out there about the concept?
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody in the Zoom has any questions, feel free to unmute and ask them. But James, I'm curious to hear from your perspective what cybersecurity looks like in a multiplanetary future. What needs to be prioritized as we expand outwards?
So lessons learned from how we really do it poorly here, right? So our systems, when I became the CIO of the FBI, which was my final position, the FBI had been a 108-year-old organization. So what did we do, right? So for 108 years, we bolted on security. We didn't think about it as a priority. We didn't build resilient systems. We were doing the mission of the FBI, and technology and cyber was an afterthought, right? It was just something that kind of grew up with us. And you can't make the mistakes that we make here on Earth, right? When we become a multiplanetary species, we absolutely have to build it in ahead of time. It has to be part of not only our satellite ecosystem, right? Because if I can hack into a satellite, and that satellite is now communicating with, some outpost that we have on Mars or somewhere else, right? I can affect the air handlers. I can affect the water system. I can affect everything, right? So let's not make those same mistakes that we make here. It has to be built in ahead of time. It has to be built simultaneously, and it has to be resilient.
Absolutely. What are the weak points, do you think, in the current infrastructure that we have? And what does it take to build resilient infrastructure for a multiplanetary future? What does that actually look like?
The interesting part about the internet, right, is it is just spread out. It's all the servers out there, it's all the computers out there. It is so not one thing, right? And so you're spreading the risk, and you're spreading the security needs out to the billions of endpoints, billions with a B, billions of endpoints out there. And every one of those endpoints is a vulnerability. And so everybody wants something that's fast and secure. And so what do? We pull that safety and security into the center of the circle, so to speak. But every one of those endpoints, the billions of them out there, are still vulnerable. And so it's the architecture that we need to change our strategy on. It's the architecture that we need to change our philosophy on, and not just, actually we push out so many new apps and so many new enterprise devices because we're thinking about it in terms of speed, not in terms of security. We change that philosophy a bit and start sending out, more secure devices, and not let the applications and the tools on the backside of that conversation actually secure them, be a totally different conversation to have.
I'm interested in that kind of conflict between trying to build things safely and build things quickly, because I do often hear that the DoD is trying to move more quickly in the way that they're procuring technology from commercial space in order to be adversaries to certain technologies.
Yeah.
But you also speak about how we need to be doing that in a very safe and very secure, resilient way. So how do you balance those two needs on the DoD's side?
Yeah, well, I was faced with that same conversation to have on the FBI side, right? How did I, or how could I actually balance the needs of the FBI, the mission of the FBI, right? And then our cybersecurity needs, right? So for those of you who don't know a lot about the FBI, right? 56 field offices in the US, 400 resident agencies that support those 56 field offices, and 88 legal attaches all over the world, right? We have a number of different missions that are simultaneous and connected to DoD missions in places, Iraq, Afghanistan, other places. So that intersection collided a number of times between the FBI's mission and the DoD mission. And I honestly, right, I struggled with how do we make it fast? How do I deploy the ability for my agent who's either sitting out in the middle of Montana or Idaho, where there's absolutely no cell service? They're working a murder scene, and guess what? They're out there on their own, right? How do I secure those communications? How do I do that? And it is a problem, right? It is one that the FBI has now spent a lot of time and energy on. How to solve that, though, is to look at what I call the connecting or colliding missions, right? Both all the three-letter agencies, right? NSA, CIA, right? The FBI, right? All part of that intelligence community. There's a whole piece on the DoD side that is also part of that intelligence community, right? And I think we need to start there. If you take those agencies together in that mission and start to solve that problem in a combined way, right? That's how we get ahead of it.
How do you think building a decentralized architecture in space contributes to that goal? I know that the SDA is working on a decentralized architecture rather than having this kind of more traditional standardized or centralized architecture in space. How does that bolster national security?
Well, right, if we have right now, it's what I talked about earlier, right? We have this centralized security where we just bolt on things to the outside, and every endpoint, all the billions of endpoints are still vulnerable because we don't control them. If you create the larger decentralized hubs and secure them ahead of time, those decentralized hubs now become your endpoints, right? They now become the billions of endpoints out there that are built with security that you absolutely control, as opposed to the billions of devices that you will never have access to, right? And so I completely agree with that concept.
Sure. Are there any emerging technologies? I know that there are things like optical communications that are meant to make communication from space to Earth more secure. Are there any other technologies that you've heard of that you think need to be pushed forward more in order to ensure that we have a safer, more secure space architecture?
So, actually emerging, applications or tools. No, I'm not familiar with any of those. Because guess what? Those change every day, right? Every company, we have probably 400, 500, 600 partners out there that are constantly evolving their technology every day. And so one of the strategy problems I think we find ourselves in, and certainly our clients find ourselves in, is they're rushing to the next tool. They're rushing to the next software update. They're rushing to the next, all right, what is that silver bullet? What is that piece of technology that's going to solve all of my problems? And guess what? That doesn't exist, right? And I don't believe it's going to, based upon, again, how we look at our architecture and how we design these systems. And so I don't think the answer is really the emerging technology. I think it's our emerging strategy and architecture, because then guess what? Based upon where you're at, what your mission is, where you find yourself, then you can select from this suite of tools and applications out there that really do help you secure yourself, right? Because there's tons of them, but it's the square peg round hole thing, right? So you can't, not every solution is going to be the solution for your ecosystem, depending upon how you built it, right? Not every solution out there, and I looked at a ton of them as the CIO of the Bureau, right? But I had to design our strategy and our future architecture based upon my current ecosystem.
Sure, makes total sense. I'm curious also from your position as CIO of the FBI, working with ransomware attacks and issues in cybersecurity. I'm curious to hear from your perspective where you think that space company satellite operators tend to go wrong when they're designing their cybersecurity systems. What have you seen in your experience that stands out as a red flag to you?
So one of the most frightening things, especially about so ransomware groups out there, especially the Russian and Chinese proxy groups, there's probably a list of, I think it's about 25 known vulnerabilities out there in various software packages and various types of tools and apps. And guess what? We still, for some reason, use a large number of those actual applications and tools that have known vulnerabilities. And you have companies out there that are not the more mature companies that understand it and have closed those gaps and vulnerabilities. But you cannot look at this cyber connected world now without thinking about it in all of the concentric circles of risk, right? So what is your second level, third level, fourth level? We talk about third party risk all the time, right? Gone are the days where it's just third party risk. We're talking fourth party, fifth party. We are so interconnected that if any one of those fourth, fifth, sixth level organizations actually are utilizing even these basic tools and applications out there that still have known vulnerabilities, and I see it every day, right? They're just not as mature. They don't have the individuals with the skill set to actually go look up, hey, what are those known 25 vulnerabilities that are still out there, that are still being compromised? And so the whole concentric risk piece is the problem, right? And so if you can absolutely start to secure your circle of that concentric risk group, but when you get to the third, fourth, fifth, sixth party, that's where it becomes really, really difficult. And so the question again is, how do you take what you're trying to do and secure for yourself and push that out to those other concentric circles? Because that's where more of the risk lies, because you control your world, right? I controlled the FBI ecosystem, right? And we did everything we could to secure that. But when I start to get out to vendors and I start to get out to third parties who are, either we employ consultants to come in and help us do it, right? Because we couldn't do it all ourselves. That's where the vulnerability lies.
It's interesting in the current space economy that we have. It's still fairly new, growing very quickly. And now these kind of smaller, newer companies are becoming very important to national defense and the national space architecture and system. How it seems like it would be a fairly labor and time and expensive initiative to have to go through all of these individual vendors that are now providing services to the DoD or even to amongst themselves. How do you suggest that companies address those expenses? How can you leverage the resources that you have to make sure that you are addressing these concerns in the right ways?
Well, certainly one of the things I struggled with as the CIO, right, is this whole concept of CMMC, right? You have organizations out there that are, behemoth, right? Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, major defense contractors. But you also have these small little mom and pop companies that actually do amazing things, right? They are one piece of the larger, package that then rolls up into DoD. And how do you extend down all of those CMMC requirements, all of those, cybersecurity CMMC requirements. Again, to my point earlier, so that's like the 7th or 8th concentric ring of something that, Raytheon or Lockheed Martin may be building or doing. And so it's that's the trick. How do you secure that? How do you push that down? And honestly, it becomes an issue of having DoD or the U.S. government provide the assets if you truly want to secure it, and that is a critical aspect of some product or some service that is being provided, right? That's going to have to be pushed down by the U.S. government. It's going to have to be, because it's mom and pop places, they don't have the money, they don't have the expertise, right? You'll be lucky if some of the smaller ones, even have a CISO. They have, right, some guy who has a computer degree in college, and they've hired him, and he's learning and he's well intentioned, but he doesn't know what he doesn't know, right? And the threat actors out there are well connected, highly financed, and they share intelligence on all of those vulnerabilities way more than we do.
What avenues does the DoD currently use to make sure that their vendors and their suppliers are meeting their cybersecurity requirements?
Well, I'm not familiar exactly with what DoD does. I certainly from an FBI standpoint, I can tell you that we were very, very much in tune with taking, I'm an attorney as well. So looking at it from the legal aspect of, how are we creating SLAs with all of our third-party vendors and fourth-party and fifth-party vendors out there in order for us to truly secure that, one, from a legal standpoint, right? To make sure that we're requiring them to have the same type of security that we had. And then unfortunately, right, it becomes an audit feature. And I would almost guarantee that certainly the DoD does it exactly the same, because that's a US government kind of blueprint for, it becomes a paper, legal, and an audit exercise in order to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. But that is labor intensive, money intensive, and there's not enough actual people around to secure, again, the 4th, 5th, 6th level concentric rings of that risk profile.
Sure. Thank you so much, James. I'm going to pause for 1 second here just to make sure that we don't have any questions from the group here. If anybody does have a question, please feel free to unmute and ask, or just drop it in the chat and I will ask James for you. But I will pause 1 second to make sure that we aren't missing anybody. Thanks for the applause, Mike.
My buddy Mike.
I'm going to ask a question. Hey, I'm the text guy that was on earlier. Yeah, so we're looking at the quantum realm. DevSecOps, very, very important stuff. So we're looking at the emerging threat right now with the quantum computing. We've seen things come in. They're very, very, very concerning. But of course, it comes down to finding those guys that actually are doing some very special things. With one of the companies that presented last week or 2 weeks ago, Nebula, we brought in one of our suite technologies called ScriptString. They have an AI that's working at the quantum level that can bring some really good stuff. So where are you looking at for optimism? Are you looking for, because it sounded like you were like, well, it's all fantasy, but I'm like, I'm more optimistic. So maybe what do you think some of the things we need to be looking at into the quantum realm as we become quantum resistant, right? Isn't that important for? Oh,
it is critically important. Certainly the quantum issue presents both opportunity and threat. Right. And so the conversations that I'm having with boards, certainly Optiv is actually looking at this not just from the quantum aspect of what security implications that creates for our clients, but also the opportunity of how do we, I'm actually have some very mature boards that are asking me, and we start to have a conversation about how do boards work? How do companies now work, in Meta, right? Where do we go? Not just from utilizing the quantum piece to either protect ourselves and close gaps that we know are going to open, when when quantum comes online and really starts to create some vulnerabilities to our old encryption and old processes. But how do we turn that around and use that in the metaverse, right? So we're having both conversations, especially with what I consider very mature boards.
Yeah, and then follow up on that. Can you talk about where we start thinking about, because I'm thinking, remember, I'm revolutionary. I look for those things that are leapfrogging. So for you, do you see a quantum internet being the solution for the opportunities for the future? Operating on a quantum internet, I mean, it's a big dream, right? I think big, but I think it's doable. And can you give us, you think, a timeline or where that's going to go in the future?
Yeah, well, if I had that timeline, brother, I wouldn't be sitting here, right? But to your point, yes, I do think that is the question that needs to be answered, and I do think that will be the ultimate answer. And if you then leapfrog this to a lot of the problems that we have now with our current architectures, and certainly our old strategy and architectures that we didn't think ahead, to your point, right? We didn't think about where quantum could be 15 years ago. And so if we want to be multiplanetary, if we want to be able to create a backbone of cyber resilient spacecraft, for example, guess what? That's going to have to be on a quantum network.
Yeah, built in, like we're looking at systems.
Yes.
You're talking about the DevSecOps. It's all going towards a more resilient, starting off from the ground up, and it's just going to be exponential. So everything is going interconnected. So the quicker we get to a solid, a quantum encryption across the board, wink, wink, we need to do that. We need to be ahead of everyone, right? But it's a challenge because everybody's coming on board with IoT. And imagine in space, it's gonna be messy. So we need to get on top of it. Over.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But look at IoT. Look at the companies that I meet with every day, especially manufacturing and others that utilize IoT. And you've got organizations that are just bolting these things on because, right, they make it quicker, they make better decisions, right? They're accelerating their business processes and making them more efficient, but they're not more secure. Right. And so if you're right, and that's the problem. And then to build on that, if we absolutely eventually have, and we need to have the quantum internet piece, but it has to be both ground-based and space-based, right? You cannot have one without the other.
Yeah, it's all going to be interconnected from space. So thank you for answering these questions, by the way. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Thank you for the excellent work at the FBI. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Nino. And I think we're going to take one last question from Inara before we move on to our next speaker.
Hello, my name is Donima, and I want to be a CIA agent when I grow up. Do you have any advice for me?
Absolutely, right. I used to be the head of HR for the FBI as well. So you need languages, you need language skills, really good, like 4+ language skills, reading, writing, the ability with multiple languages, and the ability to understand the psychology of why people do the things that they do. If you want to be a case officer, I have a lot of friends who are agency case officers. Those are critical skills.
What kind of languages should I learn?
Depends on what you're interested in, right? Look at the threat actors out there in the world, right? So Chinese, Mandarin, all the different dialects, certainly. The Middle Eastern dialects are also very good to have as well.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you so much for that question. And thank you so much, James, for joining the conversation today. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Now, thanks for the great questions. It was great to be here. Good conversation, good questions, good topics.
Yeah, great. And if you wanted to get in contact with anybody after the call here, if you wanted to drop your email or LinkedIn or anything in the chat below, that would be great. No pressure, but it's been lovely to have you.
Great. Thanks for the great questions, Rachel.
Of course. Thank you.